Apparently I'm supposed to just keep it moving. All right. All right, folks, if I could have your attention, I apologize for cutting the conversations a bit short. I'm glad you guys are able to engage at your tables to Roberta's question. Thank you, Camille, and thank you, Roberta, for getting us started. So my name is John Kim. I'm the Executive Director of the Advancement Project California. And I appreciate that Camille talked about the tooth fairy as a big controversy at the school district she was at. My daughter, when she finally said to me, after she lost a tooth, she said, I guess the tooth fairy better go to the ATM tonight. I think she, at that point, figured it out, what was going on. And so no teacher told her this. She just kind of figured it out on her own. All right, so, you know, a couple of things. So I have been with the organization for some time, and I've been to quite a few of these water coolers. And I make a habit of speaking about my kids from this stage. My daughter is also in middle school, 7th grader. You know, one of the things that is happening, and it's a new stage for us, and we're kind of exploring this out, is that, and pardon my French here, but she is sort of growing her own internalized BS radar, right? Like that's sort of the stage that she's at. And, you know, she kind of is more attuned to where she sees BS and then now has more of a power and voice to like express it. And that generally is an amazing and important thing for this powerful girl to kind of grow and learn. It's hard when she points it directly at me, though. She says, hey, you know, I tell her not to curse, and then I go on stage talking about a BS meter. Or I say, you got to treat everybody respectfully, and then she sees me driving in LA traffic. And she's like, what's going on? But in these political times, the amount of BS that swirls, unfortunately, so it's important for her to be rooted in this radar, to understand it, to grow it, to learn it. And then as she's now getting to a stage where she's exploring relationships with boys or girls, I also want her to have a very strong BS meter in that regard as well. But one of the things about growing up in California, I think, and she's started to talk more about this with me, is unfortunately how much her radar goes off in this state. And the idea that, you know, the state sort of holds itself up as such a wealthy, economically powerful state, but still she sees homeless encampments time and time again. We talk about we're the global leaders in technology, but we can't seem to figure out what to do with these wildfires and how to target the blackouts. And then we say that we are the progressive answer to what's coming out of the White House, but she still sees day in and day out the massive inequities by geography and race that we sort of prop up and hold up here. And so not just my child, but I'm assuming kids all in your lives have these internal BS radars just kind of going off constantly. And what is our responsibility, right? To allow them to understand, yes, that is real. There is a mismatch, a contradiction in this state. And then what is our job to actually fundamentally do something about it? You know, to me, all those contradictions in this state kind of play out into this one sort of modality where I think we sell ourselves as the golden state, but really what we've become is the state of perpetual crisis, right? We run from thing to thing and try to patch it up and solve it and say, we're good, it's fine, and then we move on to the next crisis. But I actually think that we are not going to be able to fundamentally deal with these contradictions, and we are not going to be able to move forward as a state until we look backwards. Until we look back at where we might have gone wrong as a state, where we actually maybe started to be inauthentic in our goldenness as a state. And, you know, I think you'd have to look back 40 years ago, right? In 1978, in the late 70s, California voted for the passage of Prop 13. And, you know, that moment was when California decided to give up the mantle of the Golden State to feed sort of the two-headed dragon of corporate greed and racism, right? And, you know, when we talk about that campaign, there were sort of 3 layers of what was going on in that campaign, right? The top layer was about grandma's home, right? Like it's unfair what could potentially happen with property taxes for grandma's home, and so we need to protect grandma, okay? And that was a fine thing to focus in on as a public campaign, but underneath that, and I was 3 at the time, so I wasn't politically conscious, so, but I read what I understood from the history books is that underneath the public grandma's campaign layer was another insidious campaign around racial fear and animus, right? That our demographics were shifting and there was something to be afraid of in terms of our newfound diversity, and therefore we needed to kind of lock the gates, okay? But the third layer of this cake, this BS cake that we had in the 70s, was not just about racial animus or grandma's home, but in the end, it was about corporations designing out loopholes so they can make off like bandits, right? And since the passage of Prop 13, we actually had seen a massive shifting in who was paying property taxes overall. Before that proposition, about 75% of property taxes were paid by corporations and 25% by residential, right? And over the past 40 years, that's shifted completely. And so now the burden of who pays property taxes is 75% on residential, right? Which is who the public campaign was supposed to be for, right? It was supposed to be for grandma's home, but now the burden is much more on residential homes, right? And so I think it's really important for us as a state to not just keep tinkering around the edges and jumping from crisis to crisis and acting like it's all good. I think it's important for us to radically kind of look backwards and deal with these ghosts from the past so we can be unlocked in terms of finding out who we are really as a state. Okay, and we have an opportunity in this next election cycle to actually do that. 2020 is not just a massive political inflection point for this country, but also for this state. And we're really excited at the Advancement Project California, as well as a few others who are going to be joining me on the panel, been working as part of a large coalition to bring around a reform to Proposition 13, to actually finally say, hey, let's split between what the corporate and the commercial industrial lands are and residential. Let's keep residential, no changes. Let's keep that just fine as is. But let's just close those loopholes. So commercial and industrial lands now have to pay their fair share. And what can happen is an unlocking of, I think we're gonna find out that it's actually now not 11 billion, but $12 billion a year, right, rolling through our communities and unlocking the potential and dealing with this fundamental contradiction that we've let play out for 40 years in California. Okay, so I'm really excited to have our panel kind of come up and join me here on stage, and we're gonna have a bit of a conversation about schools and communities first, and about this potential opportunity that we have a year from now. So I'm gonna ask Kim, Pattillo Brownson, Taryn, Ishida, and Toby to come join me on stage. So why don't we get a round of applause for them as they come on up. I am also going to note while they're walking up that this is not the only potential initiative on the ballot for revenue for schools. There is also a potential revenue measure from our friends at CSBA and AXA, and they'll have an opportunity tomorrow to also share about that initiative. But today we're going to speak about schools and communities first. So again, another round of applause for our panelists here. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
All right, so Toby, new president,
Yes.
California Teachers Association. Very excited to have you.
Thank you.
And Taryn, our executive director from Californians for Justice, and Kim Pattillo Brownson. We call her our Kim, but she is First Five LA vice president. So thank you all for joining. Let me actually start with you, Kim, in terms of a question here. Roberto laid out the existing continuous need, or ongoing need around revenue for our K-12 system. She touched on ECE as well. Can you dig in a little bit more about the needs for ECE in that field moving forward?
Sure. So I'll address both ECE, but also maybe I'll start with a sort of a thought around how two systems that we envision to be separate and freestanding are already actually quite intertwined. So one of the really fascinating studies that came out of LPI, the Learning Policy Institute, showed that our K-12 system and our K-12 kids on a year-to-year basis are actually doing quite well. They are year-to-year making the same gains that kids around the country are, and are actually keeping pace. There's a narrative out there that California kids are somehow struggling or doing something less well in California than around the nation. But year to year, we're actually meeting the same delta, same change growth every year as most other states. What is different and a standout in California, however, is that the point of entry is that California kids are starting from behind. And this is across the board. This is both low-income kids more acutely, but also upper-income kids. And what that means is that we are basically saying to California kids, you're going to start behind the 8 ball. You are going to start from behind at a systemic level, and we're going to say, catch up and good luck with that. And that is fundamentally unfair, but also just nonsensical to a certain degree if we actually want to see appreciable gains. The other ways in which this intertwines our systems economically is that K-12 then has a function of a higher level of special ed services in LA County and LAUSD in my home city and county. The level of special ed diagnosis is off the charts, particularly for low-income kids and particularly for kids of color. And what that means is that we are paying a price for an overdiagnosis of systems that can't tell the difference between kids who have not had an opportunity to succeed and prepare versus kids who actually need special ed services. And there are real numbers of kids who need that, but our systems actually just don't disaggregate quite well enough yet to tell the difference. The differential that we've seen in some other states across the country, and North Carolina is a complicated example because they have complicated politics, but what they saw when they invested in early education is almost a third reduction in their K-12 special ed costs. And the cost of special ed for a school district is almost 2x what a traditional K-12 cost is on an annual basis. So when you think about that over the course of a child's K-12 careers, that's 12 years of paying twice what you don't need to for a failure to have invested on the front end. And that's ridiculous, right? That just makes no economic sense to anyone who's actually trying to make numbers pencil out, trying to make justice pencil out, and falls into that category of unnecessary harm that we are doing to ourselves. So the other part that I'll just highlight very quickly is what Roberta touched on her numbers earlier, that among 0 to 5-year-olds in California, it's over 700,000 kids, 0 to 5, who we know are income eligible, who meet every criteria, who today get nothing. And we know, we have designated, we have done the income eligibility work to figure out that they are our target market. They are our target population that would benefit, that would get the greatest gains, and yet there's more than 700,000 of those kids who get nothing. I think the order of magnitude of that obviously is just deafening, but it is also something that we've been chipping away at, and I think we're starting to see some progress and also more political will than there's ever been to actually chip away on an ongoing basis. But the numbers, I think, are very different within the age group. It's about 30% of low-income 4-year-olds who still lack access to an opportunity to learn. It's about 64% of low-income 3-year-olds. And then the super deafening 91% of 0 to 2-year-olds who are fully hitting eligibility benchmarks who still get nothing. The other side of this also is that what children have access to, who are lucky enough to land in the population of those who get services, is very different. In some places it's regulated, sometimes it can be really high quality, and I've absolutely walked into classrooms and family childcare homes where it is phenomenal and inspiring. And to Camille's point earlier, like walking into a classroom is such good heart work. But there are also lots of spaces where we have little to no idea what is going on a regular basis, and little to no purview to be able to actually push in supports. The early childhood literature that shows return on investment is very much based on about 3 models, primarily from the Midwest: Abecedarian, Chicago Parent-Child, and Perry Preschool. And in all of those programs where we show phenomenal return on investment and longitudinal gains, what is also unique is that it's not just literacy and numeracy. There are a host of wraparound supports that go into it in terms of health and parent engagement. There's also a host of sort of educator training opportunities that we have not yet prioritized as a state, and that those, as in the K-12 system, cost money. But it's an investment that pays off on the other side. So maybe I'll just close with this thought, because this is an advancement project. I feel like it's okay to always just quote MLK. And the economic systems of ECE and K-12, I think, very much are well described by that very commonly quoted Martin Luther King quote, which is that we are all in an inescapable network of mutuality, that we are tied in a single strand of destiny. And the degree to which we can get K-12 financing right also has incredible implications for ECE's financing and vice versa. It is all one system. They are all the same kids. They go from being ECE's kids to K-12 kids, but from a family's perspectives, they want all of their kids to succeed, and we should want the same.
That's right. Thank you so much, Kim. Good, excellent. So to make that connection, Toby, if you could, so we've seen extraordinary energy and call to action from teachers through the recent strikes up and down the state. And in many cases, the support for this particular initiative, Schools and Communities First, was sort of a key pillar of some of those fights. And so if you could talk a little bit about, from the CTA perspective, why it was important for you all to endorse the initiative of Schools and Communities First, and sort of what you guys are hoping to take where to take the fight moving forward.
Well, the fight changed from the mindset of educators that people looked at us and said, well, it's all about you. It's all about self-serving, salaries, pay, and so forth and so on. And this movement that has occurred, and it's still developing, is basically, it's not about just us. Yes, we need to be a part of that because we need to be respected and regarded in a professional manner. But it's more about the conditions in which our children are being taught in. And without adequate funding, it can't occur. As been stated on here, and I told Roberta, I said, well, I can just sit down because you basically stated exactly what I was going to say. The Schools and Communities First Act that's going to be on 2020 is just a drop in the bucket that's really needed in order for us to be adequately funding our school systems. We need to somehow develop a dedicated funding source that's not based on any arbitrary information, but truly meets the needs of our students. And when those things occur, you'll have smaller class sizes, you'll have the ability to touch each and every single one of those students in the classroom, regardless of where they are in the system. And it's not just from K to 12. I have to look at it from K to 14 because we also have community college folks. But it is the system in which they move through. And if we invest in them, they will truly be prepared for the society and be productive. So it's, as I said, the movement is not just about educators, it's about the children in those classrooms, and it's about the community, because we realize that a child cannot come to school willing to learn if they're hungry. If they have trauma in their life, if their medical needs are not being taken care of. We have to look at that whole gamut. And when we do so, they will then be better equipped and have that foundation in order to just springboard into all the possibilities.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Toby. Taryn, if you could, we've been talking about schools and communities first. Maybe give us some details now on what's involved with the initiative, what's the pathway for this particular fight. So if you can kind of lay that out for us, that'd be great.
All right, you all get ready for one of the best slide decks you're going to see all conference long as I lay out the facts. Well, first off, I just want to say it's a real privilege to be here. Thank you, Advancement Project, for putting on this conversation. I want to ground this conversation around schools and communities first, both in the teacher experience, but I think also what unites us in the room, right, which is our young people and the families who have been underserved and under-resourced in our state for a long time. John spoke to 1978. I wasn't born then. I think many of you probably weren't either.
I can't say I was.
Okay. Okay. Well, don't date yourselves. Well, I have the privilege of representing, a lot of organizers in the state who work with young people and families who are part of those low-income, under-resourced communities. And if you go to any one of our communities, you don't have to show them the beautiful research that Roberta just shared a little while ago, because they live that experience, right? They live those gaps, they live those deficits of resources that they see other communities have. For 20 years, the students I work with and we organize with at Californians for Justice, they've always picked resources and school funding as one of their #1 priorities. No matter what year it is, they have always known and lived that experience. And they know it because it's things like, I've been waiting months to speak to my counselor because we have the worst student to counselor ratio in the country. And it was only in my senior year that I learned I'm not A through G eligible, only in my senior year. It's things like, I aspire to be a doctor, but in my biology labs, we actually just have to imagine what it's like to do an experiment because we can't actually afford real experiment equipment. We can't dissect a frog. We just imagine what it's like to dissect a frog. You get what I'm saying? So that is the real experience in 2019 that the young people that I have an opportunity to organize with are telling me every week. And that's what makes me passionate about getting up in the morning. Who got up before the sun was up? Who got up before the sun was up? Yeah, and when you're 7 months pregnant, let me tell you, just getting up is a battle. So I'm truly passionate about this, and I know everyone on the stage is passionate as well. And I hope everyone here walks away feeling that same energy for the long-term fight in 2020, but even well beyond that, that we need to come together around the resources our communities deserve. So let's cue this up. All right. So I think most of us know in our backyards, we can see this huge wealth disparity in our state, right? We are the 5th largest economy in the nation, not even in the world, in the world, yes, in the world, globally. And we house 26% of the United States billionaires right here in California. I live in San Jose, so I actually can see some of those billionaires' houses up on the hills, you know, with like golf courses or something in their backyards. But we know that there is wealth here, right? It's not a matter of we don't have resources. It's just where are those resources going? Now, with all that said, we know we have the worst poverty rate in the country when you adjust for cost of living, which means 1 in 5 children, like you all have heard, 1 in 5 children are living in poverty. We are the bottom third of per student spending in our K-12 system, even after really important reforms like Proposition 30 and Proposition 55 in 2016. And I know firsthand the libraries and hospitals in my community, they aren't able to open fully in all the hours that they're supposed to be able to because they aren't receiving the funding, the full whole child wraparound resources that we need. So what a lot of communities came together for actually over a decade now, this movement has been growing about how do we not just do these Band-Aid approaches to resource issues, but actually address some of the underlying systemic inequities. And one of those inequities is Proposition 13 that passed in 1978. And so the solution of Schools and Communities First is the first real valid attempt to go after the split roll property tax. And what do I mean by split roll? means we are just focused on the corporations who have not been paying their fair share of property taxes. This is pre-1978, right? Corporations like Chevron, Disneyland, these beautiful malls that are actually paying substantially less property tax than properties next door. That has cost us, since 1978, $585 billion that should have been going into our schools, that should have been going into early childhood services, that should have been going into our parks and libraries. $585 billion we've lost in this state. And so 2020 is about reclaiming some of that money that our communities really deserve. This is how Schools and Communities First works. We are looking to address the corporate property tax loophole created by Proposition 13, which means $11 to $12 billion per year for K-12 to community colleges. It is a more stable source of funding than some of our income and sales taxes, right? So it provides a more stable annual source of funding. We're able to, again, close those commercial property tax loopholes, invest in vital services like public education, like parks, like hospitals, our libraries. There are transparency and accountability features built in because this was fought for and won by a lot of the civil rights folks and social justice people in our coalition made sure that we had pieces in the proposition that were about transparency and accountability. How can we help you? That's right, Siri. So we can help you by protecting homeowners and renters, right? This does not touch homeowners and renters, and in fact, we are actually giving a boost to small businesses through this initiative. We're providing a once-in-a-generation tax incentive for small businesses, which we're defining as properties under $3 million. That accounts for about 88% of small businesses out there will actually hopefully be protected and benefit from some of the incentives of this initiative. And lastly, we're going to level the playing field. We have a lot of tech corporations who somewhat care about social justice. I won't group them all in there, but we have a lot of newer corporations in California who are backing this initiative because they see that they are paying a far higher cost than their neighboring properties next door, right? So this kind of levels the playing field. And I just want to end with just a kind of a personal story about why this initiative, why I'm getting up at 5 a.m. all around the state. Every day I talk to somebody who gives me a ride to the airport. I talk to the people on the plane sitting next to me. I am really passionate about this campaign because I know that this baby in my belly, that all of the children that we fight for and work for every day, they deserve so much better. They don't just deserve adequacy. They don't just deserve to survive. They deserve something excellent, something world-class. And I know that this very wealthy economy can give it to them. So I hope today that we're going to come together and really unite behind this initiative or many other initiatives that could improve the prosperity and the liberation of all of our communities.
Excellent. Thank you, Taryn. Thank you. So we'll just do another round of quick questions with the other panelists very quickly before we move on to a call to action. So for Schools and Communities First, Kim, I wanted to ask about what this means for ECE. You had talked about the ongoing need, the 700,000 kids that are fully qualified but currently do not get a thing in terms of subsidized support. And so, what can this initiative, but when passed, even though it doesn't have ECE specifically written into it, what are some opportunities for early learning care and the broader community?
Sure. So what's one of the sort of surprising pieces of analysis that I think Early Edge California, there we are, did maybe a year ago, was looking at where do early learning opportunities exist around the state. And what's fascinating to me is having done this work for some time and started with the sort of early days of the water cooler, it used to be that the state preschool program was predominantly community-based providers, and there were fewer school district-based providers. During the recession, I think during a lot of the times of the cuts, school districts were able to retain programs even as there were cuts, in part because there was still K-12 funding that could actually help cover the breach, and played an absolutely vital role in preserving opportunities for young children. What that has created right now, though, is that about 2/3 of state preschool programs around the state for 3 and 4-year-olds, at least, are run by LEAs, by school districts, county offices of ed. And that is a central backbone function, and it is also one that has enabled school districts to provide teachers who have had the benefit of ongoing professional development, have had the benefit of higher levels of training, greater stability in the workforce because they're a part of the workforce that's represented by labor, and so they have salary benefits, health benefits, which all lead to stability of the teaching workforce. And so to the extent that there is the percentage set aside for K-12, that has downstream implications for all of the early learning programs to both strengthen the capacity of school districts to expand programs, to improve programs, and to serve more children. What's also, I think, been really heartening is that school districts have largely, though they're not necessarily required to, done some targeting on their own between TK and, for example, again, in my home district of Los Angeles Unified, their expanded TK programs have only gone to supplemental and concentration school populations. So it has been targeted even though they have not actually been required to do so by state law, which I think is very encouraging and right-headed. The other portion of Schools and Communities First is that county systems are oftentimes the place where you get the wraparound services, where you get parks and recs providing programs for drop-ins, for family child cares, for stay-at-home parents or nanny shares, to actually come in and have sort of socialization for the younger side of children. It's where you get home visiting, where you get parent support, parent training. And so there are opportunities, I think, for growth for the early childhood system out of this new funding stream. One other way that I'll just flag is that similar to LCFF, which essentially said locals, statewide transparency and accountability is required in terms of reporting, but the actual decision-making as to where dollars go is decided at the local level. And so that, in some ways, sets up an opportunity, I think, for localities, for counties to actually have conversations about, well, how does your home county actually invest in early childhood, or how does it not? And how could it do so in ways that it should? And it sets up, I think, a space for advocacy at the local level that has not so much been a part of the conversation until very recently. I will say, just in the spirit of full disclosure, First 5 LA hasn't taken a position on Schools and Communities First. We have a board rule that we don't consider propositions until they've actually been filed and gotten the requisite number of signatures. But I think it'll be an exciting conversation, right. And that's part of 2020.
Good. Excellent. Yeah, part of the beauty of the initiative is 45% of the revenue going to K-12 and community college campuses, and then the remainder going to local jurisdictions. So we would see new investments not only in the classroom, but also in the communities and neighborhoods that the children are walking through to get to these classrooms. Toby, if you could, just to share a little bit about sort of the key priorities for CTA in terms of better supporting teachers and students that this campaign could fund, and then what you all are doing to get your teachers ready and your members ready for this fight.
Well, the funding naturally will help,
right?
Because again, it will allow the class sizes to be small, it will allow the teachers to have adequate supplies that they're not pulling out of their pocket and paying for. You know, it'll help. I don't think it's going to remedy it completely, but I'll speak to what we're doing in order to try to help the initiative. You folks probably do not know, but in order for it to requalify for the ballot, we need 1.6 million signatures. That's 1.6 million. And CTA, because we are in every community, we feel that we can help significantly in order to have that occur. So we have made ourselves accountable for 150,000 of those signatures. It's not going to be an easy task, but we know that as long as we educate our members, because that's the important part.
Right.
A lot of negative campaigns are going to come out towards us.
Right.
And we're going to have to decide to be able to tell our folks, like, look, this is for our communities. This is not going to harm homeowners. This is not going to harm renters. It's going to go after those folks that have had the luxury, and I'll say luxury because that's what it has been, of not paying their fair share. We're going to say to them, you're going to be held accountable now. You're going to have to pay your fair share because the communities that we are living in and working in deserve it.
Right.
So it's an educational campaign that we are truly going to
Yes.
start. And we're in regions, so I've visited 3 of my regions during their leadership conferences, and that has been the focus. So,
Excellent.
okay.
Thank you. So let me catch us up a little bit on time. Let me just close the panel, and then we'll pass it over to Taryn to help close us out with a call to action. But let me say this. So we have seen the state shifting over the past 40 years from the golden state to the sort of state of perpetual crisis. We know full well, and the evidence is right in front of our faces about sort of where we have been foregoing our sort of promise as a state. And one of the things that we're encouraged by with this campaign, not only by the design of it in terms of where the resources go, but also about how it's being designed and driven, not just by our friends in labor, but also with folks from the community and all across this state, is that when we do get aligned and when we are clear-eyed about our mission and goals as a state, that we can maybe not just harken back and try to go back to becoming the golden state again, because unfortunately the golden state didn't shine for everybody in the 1970s as well, but that we might actually break beyond that idea and actually maybe go for a place where we can become the beloved state, where we can actually build community across difference to fund our needs in community as well in the classroom. And so we're really excited about this particular opportunity with Schools and Communities First, and we'll ask Taryn to kind of close us out from here in terms of a call to action. But again, there are, to Toby's point, so many other opportunities for us to be looking at as we proceed. So if you guys can join me in thanking Toby and Kim and Taryn for this panel. And then we'll go ahead and get off stage while Taryn goes and closes us out for the call to action. Thank you so much.
It's all yours. Thanks, John.